Hey, welcome. This is the Ben Shapiro Show. We got a lot coming up for you this hour. A little bit later on in the hour, we'll be taking your calls and answering some questions from our mailbag at 855-236-3228, 855-236-3228. But we begin this hour with how the media are treating the aftermath of the Democratic debate. The New York Times does this thing where they survey the members of their op-ed page and then see how they think people did. Naturally, the op-ed page loved Elizabeth Warren, and you can tell who the partisans are by how they actually applied their particular standard of performance to this debate. So naturally, they think Elizabeth Warren won. Why? Well, because they all loved Elizabeth Warren beforehand. Right? They all thought Elizabeth Warren was great before she started, and they thought she was great when she ended. The only person on the New York Times editorial page who's even mildly interesting on this stuff is Maureen Dowd. Because Maureen Dowd is kind of an interesting, bizarre thinker. But if you look at sort of the typical far lefties, the people like Michelle Goldberg over there, and the people like Melanie Price, those folks were already in Warren's camp. Ross Douthat, I thought, was exactly on the money about Elizabeth Warren. He gave her a 6 out of 10. He said, another solid performance overall, but she lost the opening exchange on healthcare, disappeared entirely for the first hour. Maureen Dowd, right on the money. She says, more free stuff, and Aunt B. Warren's expertise is appealing in the age of Trump, though, like President Obama, she tends to lecture. That seems about right. Now, the fact is, she basically disappeared in this debate. Now, if you think she needs to make a move, it was a bad debate for her. If you think she can just sit there and everybody else collapses around her like sandcastles on a beach, then it was fine. And she didn't collapse. She didn't have any big boo-boos. There was no moment where she demonstrated she was completely exposed. She's too smart for that. But she really didn't have much to say. Pete Wehner said she was highly evasive on her healthcare plan. Overall, she was completely forgettable. I think that's exactly right. Now, the way you can tell the New York Times is totally skewed in their view, the op-ed page of these candidates, is that they said the second best candidate on stage last night was Kamala Harris. No. Kamala Harris was a disaster on stage last night. She was terrible. Not only did she declare she would just throw away the Constitution and then laugh maniacally like a Bond villain, she also suggested openly on the stage that Donald Trump was like a small person hiding behind a curtain in The Wizard of Oz. She had all these prepped sort of laugh lines, and they all fell flat, and then she laughed hysterically because no one else was. She must be a real hit at parties. Again, Maureen Dowd gets this one right. She says she went all Brechtian and broke the fourth wall to talk directly to President Trump. But it's hard for her to be commanding while she's still trying to calibrate her prosecutorial record. She still doesn't have the vision thing. Ross Douthat said no terrible moments, a few good ones, nothing to stop her slow fade out of the top tier. I don't think that's right. Miriam Powell said she was relaxed and well coached and laughed at a lot of her own jokes. Well, if you found that charming, then I guess, all right. But most people, I think, watch that and they're like, this is weird. Pete Wehner, again, gets this one right. He says she decided to cozy up to Barack Obama and aim her fire at Donald Trump. She got off some good lines against him, but it doesn't help that she laughs a little too hard at her own jokes, especially about the Wizard of Oz. They gave Cory Booker a 6 out of 10. I think that's about right. Maureen Dowd, though, says, again, I think Maureen Dowd is right on these. I've never said these words before. Maureen Dowd is right about this. Right? Maureen Dowd said he's not much of a presence. I think that's about right. I think that's effectively true. Pete Buttigieg, they gave him a 6, but most people just said meh, petering out. Again, I think that is correct. They gave Beto some pretty good marks. Maureen Dowd was very enthusiastic that he said he was going to come grab guns. Ross Douthat, I think, points out correctly, extremely woke, coming for your guns, Beto, might be an improvement on pointless waste of campaign dollars, Beto, but only a marginal one. They've got Joe Biden at a 6. So basically, their default was a 6. If they had nothing good to say about you, you ended up at a 6. Which means that nobody actually moved, right? Even in the New York Times sort of informal poll, they've got Elizabeth Warren at 7.5 and Biden at 6, but that ain't going to do any damage to Biden. You know, Biden is old. He is slow. He is not going to be as energetic as some of the other candidates on stage, but he's also less alienating than a lot of the other candidates on the stage. Now, Cory Booker is trying to gain momentum by doing what Julian Castro tried to do on the stage last night. Julian Castro on the stage basically suggested that Biden's brain was now febrile, that Biden had lost control of his bladder and capacity to speak. Cory Booker did the same thing right after the debate. He goes into the spin room and he says there are a lot of people concerned about Joe Biden fumbling. I think fewer than are willing to vote for you, Cory Booker. So there's that.
There's a lot of people who are concerned about Joe Biden's ability to carry the ball all the way across the end line without fumbling. And I think that Castro has some really legitimate concerns about Can he be someone in a long, grueling campaign that can get the ball over the line? And he has every right to call that out.
Now, this is going to grow louder and louder, but the fact is that the Democratic electorate, just like the Republican electorate, all electorates at this point, are disproportionately older, not younger. And it is also true that the real appeal, like Booker is counting on the idea that at some point black voters will turn on Joe Biden. I don't see that happening. He was Barack Obama's VP. At some point here, you assume that if this continues to be competitive, he will ask Barack Obama for a direct endorsement. And it would be a real jerk move for Obama not to give it to him, obviously. Now, Obama could do that because Obama ain't known for being the world's nicest dude. But still, I think that ripping away black support from Joe Biden, especially from Elizabeth Warren, right? If Kamala Harris were performing, maybe. If Cory Booker had any numbers, maybe. But you really think that black voters are going to be like, you know what? I'm tired of this Biden guy who is Obama's VP. I'm turning to the whitest person in the world, Elizabeth Warren. Or the even whiter than that person, Bernie Sanders. Like that's not a thing that is going to happen. So that means that for the moment, at least, Joe Biden remains the front runner. He keeps having these bizarre kind of old people moments, but I think we've all baked, is that baked into the cake? That's really the question. Is Joe Biden being an old dope baked into the cake? I think kind of, because the transition from he's just a dope to he's an old dope is not all that far. Nobody ever thought that this was a guy who was razor sharp and now he's lost his edge. It was like he's kind of a dull blade and now he's a little bit duller than he was before. Nobody's going, oh, well, you know, that drop-off for Joe Biden was steep. Nope, it's been a pretty slow decline since 1988. So I don't think that people are really looking at Biden and going, well, I guess he can't handle it anymore. And I really don't think the age thing alone is going to sink Joe Biden. Now, with that said, what is hilarious is to watch the Democratic Party just lie about its own positions on this sort of stuff. So you had this moment after the debates where Cory Booker came out and said, you know, Republicans keep talking about Democrats confiscating their weapons. That's a bunch of nonsense. We would never do anything like that.
I hate when Democrats use the language that Republicans try to use to scare people away, as opposed to just the sort of the pragmatism and practicality of this. You have to set up a system. Yeah, that is mandatory. You have to set up a system to pull them off. But this idea, this imagery that the fearmongers and demagogues try to say of somehow armed a police officer showing up and confiscating weapons, that's the fear-mongering.
It's fear-mongering, according to Cory Booker. Okay, fast cut to Beto O'Rourke saying, no, yeah, we're actually going to show up at your house with guns and we're going to take your guns from you.
So just to underline it, it will be voluntary. It won't be, hell yes, we'll come get your guns.
No, it's not voluntary. I want to make sure that we make the distinction here. It is mandatory. It will be the law. You will be required to comply with the law. So, I mean, as with many of our laws, we don't go door to door searching people's homes to see if they are in fact breaking the law. But we expect people to comply with the law.
Okay, but that's actually not true. There are very, very, very few laws where if you don't comply with the law, you are not fined. And then if you don't pay the fine, then they don't come to your house with guns and take you away to jail. Right? That is the enforcement mechanism. The government is a giant gun. The only question is which direction that giant gun is pointed. So as I say, President Trump delivered some counter-programming to the Democratic debate last night. He did this rally in Baltimore. People went nuts. How could he go to Baltimore? He called it rat and rodent infested, which it is. I mean, they have a serious rat and rodent infestation problem in Baltimore because it is a horribly run city. And it was always fun to watch the media pretend that Baltimore was not a horribly run city when Baltimore has one of the nation's highest murder rates, when they have pockets of poverty that are just appalling. The same people who are like, America is racist and segregated. They're like, Baltimore is beautifully run. Baltimore is a fantastic example of a city that is de facto segregated, even if de jure it is not segregated. You have these pockets that are largely black and extraordinarily poor in horribly governed areas because of corrupt politicians. It's just a horribly, horribly run city. So Trump goes and he speaks there, and he basically just says, listen, the Democrats are threatening your traditions and your beliefs. This is why, again, if Donald Trump could tone it down like 2 points, I'm not even saying go from like that Spinal Tap 11 down to like a 5. I'm saying like go from like a Spinal Tap 11 down to a 9 or maybe an 8. He'd be fine. Because if you had a feeling of solidity looking at Trump, he'd win. Because right now the Democrats look unstable. They do. They look like they are all over the place. They look like they want to encroach on your rights in incredible fashion. When Trump says this, it rings true. Right? Here he is at the Congressional Institute last night.
We've done things that I don't think any administration has even come close in the first 2.5 years. We have done things that very, very few have even thought about doing. But we also meet to prepare for the coming fight, because the traditions and beliefs that have made the American dream possible are under attack like never before.
Okay, and I think that is right. Okay, the Democrats last night made clear that Beto O'Rourke sees America as deeply racist and horrible. That if you back enforcement of the border, Pete Buttigieg basically says you're a racist. They suggested they were going to come for all of your tax dollars. That's what Bernie is saying. They said that they were going to come for your car. Okay, that is what Elizabeth Warren actually said. And so Elizabeth Warren last night, for example, was talking about climate change, and she laid forward this insane climate change plan.
I have proposed, following Governor Inslee, that we, by 2028, cut all carbon emissions from new buildings, by 2030, carbon emissions from cars, and by 2035, all carbon emissions from the manufacture of electricity.
And she's going to do that through magic, because there's no energy source that is capable of providing the electricity for this country, for the electrical grid, outside of nuclear energy, which she wants to ban, that is capable of providing this energy without carbon emissions. It's not a thing that is going to happen. Okay, when Trump says that these people are coming for all of the basic principles of the country, they're going to undermine your way of life, that is true. That is a true thing. And President Trump was also very funny. See, this is the thing. Trump is actually entertaining. That debate last night was death on the eyeballs and the ears. President Trump did drop the funniest line of the night, far away from that Democratic debate. Here was President Trump talking about energy-efficient light bulbs. Now, I actually don't really care too much about energy-efficient light bulbs. Like, I think people are going to use them anyway. I don't think you need to regulate it. I think people tend toward energy-efficient light bulbs over time because they're energy-efficient. And the truth is that a lot of energy-efficient light bulbs have really started to look good. You have the daylight light bulbs that look pretty good. In any case, Trump goes after energy-efficient light bulbs.
People said, "What's with the light bulb?" I said, "Here's the story." And I looked at it. The bulb that we're being forced to use, number one, to me, most importantly, the light's no good. I always look orange. And so do you. The light is the worst.
Okay. I like that Trump tries to buy back the laugh line, right? There's something very charming about Trump saying that he looks orange, and then immediately he buys back the self-slamming joke, and he's like, "You look orange too. It's not just me. We all look orange." It was a good joke, and then he sort of had to ruin it, but that was a funny line. So it wasn't just controversy breaking out inside the halls of Democratic debate last night. It was also a controversy breaking out over one of the ads that ran during the Democratic debate last night. There was an ad that ran on ABC that was from something called New Faces GOP, which is a super PAC, and it's run by a Cambodian woman. And here is a little bit of the ad. It starts off, because we're on radio, so you can't see this. There's an ad. It starts off with a picture of AOC's face, and then a hole burns through the picture of her face to reveal what socialism looks like, and it looks like skulls and dead bodies and all the rest of it. So here's what the ad sounds like.
This is the face of socialism and ignorance. Does Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez know the horror of socialism? My father was minutes from death in Cambodia before a forced marriage saved his life. That's socialism. Forced obedience, starvation. Mine is a face of freedom. My skin is not white. I'm not outrageous, racist, nor socialist. I'm a Republican.
As Elizabeth Heng is the person who produced that ad. So the media go crazy over this, because how could you possibly link AOC with socialist slaughter? And how could you have a picture of her face burning? Now, I'm not sure what the objection specifically is to the picture of her face burning. Like, is that a call for violence against AOC? I'm not seeing that. And I'm really not. It's not imagery that I would have used, but I do not see how that's a call for violence. Also, AOC then came out and called the ad racist. Like she said, Republicans are running TV ads setting pictures of me on fire to convince people they aren't racist. Life is weird. Well, the person who ran the ad is Cambodian, so not sure how she's being racist. And she says in the ad that she is Cambodian and a Cambodian woman. She said, "No, this wasn't an ad for young conservatives of color. That was the pretense. What you just watched was a love letter to the GOP's white supremacist case." What absolute nonsense. Now, if she wanted, like, honestly, her best defense to this is, I'm not for the Cambodian genocide. I like Denmark. Right? That was Bernie's defense last night, actually. Right? Bernie was asked about Venezuela. And Bernie's answer was, "I don't like Venezuela. When I talk about socialism, I'm not talking about the USSR. I am not talking about Cuba. I am talking about Denmark. Denmark is a great place." That was Bernie's, and she could have given the same answer. But she didn't give the same answer. Instead, she went to racism. Right? So here is, do we have clip 31, actually?
In terms of democratic socialism, to equate what goes on in Venezuela with what I believe is extremely unfair. I'll tell you what I believe in terms of democratic socialism. I agree with what goes on in Canada and in Scandinavia, guaranteeing health care to all people as a human right.
Yeah, but he's a little warm toward Venezuela, right? I mean, he and AOC both refused to declare Maduro a dictator for a little while there and have both opposed sanctions against Venezuela, as far as I'm aware. But AOC immediately went to, this is racist. Now, this started a hashtag trending on Twitter, hashtag boycott ABC. I just would like to point out a couple of things from last night's debate. People literally called Donald Trump a racist murderer. Beto O'Rourke last night started the debate talking about what happened in El Paso, Texas. And when he talked about it, he suggested that President Trump was a mortal threat to people of color all over the country. And he was describing how America's garbage. And then at the very end, he says that we have a white supremacist in the White House who is a mortal threat to people of color all over America.
I'm going to follow Sheila Jackson Lee's lead and sign into law a reparations bill that will allow us to address this at its foundations. But we will also call out the fact that we have a white supremacist in the White House, and he poses a mortal threat to people of color all across this country.
Okay, so not a single moderator followed up and asked, do you really believe that Donald Trump poses a threat of death to minorities across America? So an ad runs during a break saying that AOC doesn't understand socialism because socialism actually looks like dead bodies. Okay, now the basic message of the ad is right, even if you don't like the imagery of the ad. Okay, but the basic message of the ad is correct. That is boycottable. But Beto O'Rourke says in a debate, this is a direct quote, on August 3rd in El Paso, Texas, two things became crystal clear for me, and I think produced a turning point for this country. The first is just how dangerous President Donald Trump is, the cost and consequences of his presidency. A racism and violence that had long been a part of America was welcomed out into the open and directed to my hometown of El Paso, Texas, where 22 people were killed, dozens more grievously injured by a man carrying a weapon he should never have been able to buy in the first place, inspired to kill by our president. He's literally calling Trump the inspiration for the murder, and he uses the phraseology that this guy's racism and violence were welcomed out into the open and directed to his hometown of El Paso. Directed to his hometown of El Paso. Not directed at, directed to. I mean, it's pretty astonishing language. And it turns out that wasn't the only language that was used last night. And Kamala Harris said, people asked me, do you think Trump is responsible for what happened? I said, well, look, I mean, obviously he didn't pull the trigger, but he's certainly been treating out the ammunition. So Democratic debate candidates, presidential candidates, can say that Donald Trump is a racist murderer who provides ammo for murder. Right? And if he's not a murderer himself, he provides the ammo for the murderer, or he directs the hate, or all the rest of this stuff. But a Cambodian woman suggests that AOC does not properly understand socialism. That's literally the text of the ad. She doesn't understand socialism. Socialism actually looks like skulls and dead bodies and this woman's family story. And that's boycottable. Methinks we have a double standard when it comes to inflammatory rhetoric. I'm getting that impression. The left is constantly complaining about inflammatory rhetoric, but they had several candidates last night who used a bit of inflammatory rhetoric from the stage, and nobody said a damned word. Nobody in the media, they had moderators there, nobody bothered to follow up. Pretty astonishing stuff. Okay, quick news update for you. Felicity Huffman, you remember the actress who apparently was trying to bribe people to get her daughter into college? Well, apparently she was just sentenced to 14 days behind bars in a college admissions scandal, which will surely be the subject of a Hollywood memoir. I'm sure we'll all be eager to read it. According to the New York Times, the actress Felicity Huffman was sentenced to 14 days in prison for paying a college consultant $15,000 to inflate her daughter's SAT score, becoming the first parent given a punishment in a sweeping scheme in which nearly 36 wealthy parents are accused of using lies and bribes to smooth their children's way into prestigious colleges. Huffman's sentence, which included a $30,000 fine, supervised release for a year, and 250 hours of community service. My favorite is the supervised release. Like, what are they afraid she's going to do? Go bribe other people who are doing SATs for her daughter? Like, is she going to just go start robbing banks now? In any case, her sentence was being closely watched as an indication of how harshly parents in this case would be punished. The judge agreed with prosecutors that a term of imprisonment was necessary to send a message that wealthy parents would not get away with trying to steal admission slots from more deserving students. Yeah, well, it's fraud. I'm not sure that putting her in jail for 2 weeks is really going to be the end of the matter. In any case, the story continues to unfold, and we will find out whether Lori Loughlin ends up spending time in the full house. as well. Apparently, according to the New York Times, there are a bunch of people who have been charged, 35 defendants charged in a similar Atlanta case. And they pled guilty and received charges of probation. So it's kind of unusual that she got a bit of a jail sentence. But on the other hand, you commit fraud, maybe you should do a little bit of jail time. I hear that. And meanwhile, the fallout from the Democratic debate continues. Matt Drudge is pushing Amy Klobuchar extraordinarily hard, which is sort of strange since Amy Klobuchar didn't really show up for the debate. She had a couple of moments. Her opening statement was, in fact, her pitch to be sort of alternative to Biden. And that was, everybody on the stage is crazy. I'm going to win a bunch of Midwestern states. And it's not a bad pitch. Here was Amy Klobuchar last night.
I believe that what unites us up here, the 10 of us, is much stronger than what divides us. And I think that's true of our country, too. You're going to hear a lot of ideas up here. Some will be great, but if you see that some of them seem a little off track, I've got a better way. If you feel stuck in the middle of the extremes in our politics and you are tired of the noise and the nonsense, you've got a home with me. Because I don't want to be the president for half of America. I want to be the president for all of America.
That is a very good pitch from Amy Klobuchar. Unfortunately, the Democratic base is busy injecting Marx directly into their veins. It's a heroin addiction site over there. So that's the heroin being Marxism. So do I think that Amy Klobuchar is really going to make a dent? No, but I guess that we can pretend that she's going to make a dent if that's fun for everybody. The truth is that nothing changed. I mean, the debate didn't change much at all in the end. The only thing that it might have changed is the widespread perception of the Democratic Party is not insane. So Chris Coons, senator from Delaware, he came out and he was like, so remember that time that Beto O'Rourke said that he was going to grab all the guns in the United States? That's a real bad look for those of us who don't happen to occupy the far left of the spectrum. Here's Chris Coons, Democrat, going, that was crazy.
I frankly think that clip will be played for years at Second Amendment rallies with organizations that try to scare people by saying Democrats are coming for your guns. Okay. I'm a gun owner. My sons and I have gone skeet shooting and hunting, and frankly, I don't think having our presidential candidates like Congressman O'Rourke did say that we're going to try and take people's guns against their will is a wise either
Did he hurt
policy
the party?
or political move.
Yes, he did hurt the party. And the fact is that all the Democrats are running screaming from Beto O'Rourke while at the same time trying to hug him. There was this very weird moment during the debate last night where every candidate on stage paid homage to Beto O'Rourke and his handling of the shooting in El Paso, which has been truly egregious. I mean, him going on TV every night and saying that America is a deeply racist place and that Trump is responsible for the shooting, is that good for the country? Not really, but I guess the Democrats on stage felt like, whatever, we'll let Beto feel good about himself. He's the next one out of the race. Anyway, meanwhile, other candidates in the race continue to swivel to the left. As I say, it is bizarre to watch people like Pete Buttigieg, who started off this race as sort of a rational character, evolve into super woke preachers. So here's Pete Buttigieg talking about how Mike Pence made him scared to come out of the closet, which is weird because Mike Pence has never scared anyone. Mike Pence was specifically asked about Buttigieg coming out of the closet, and he was like, well, good for him. Have a nice life. When Pete Buttigieg went into the military, Mike Pence actually personally called him when he got called up to Afghanistan. Pence personally called him to thank him. But Buttigieg has made a sort of cottage industry out of complaining about Mike Pence as though Mike Pence is the worst person in the world, which is just absurd. Everybody knows I'm the worst person in the world. Anyway, here's Pete Buttigieg.
And as an elected official in the state of Indiana when Mike Pence was governor, at a certain point, when it came to professional setbacks, I had to wonder whether just acknowledging who I was going to be the ultimate career-ending professional setback. I came back from the deployment and realized that you only get to live one life, and I was not interested in not knowing what it was like to be in love any longer. So I just came out.
And Mike Pence scared him. It was so scary, Mike Pence, being the governor of a state who didn't do anything. It was that scary, scary moment. Everybody at the end of this debate had their moment where they talked about what obstacles they've overcome. And the only person who actually I thought gave a really good answer to this was Biden. Biden talked about how members of his family had died and how you have to get up every morning with purpose. I thought it was actually a really nice answer, a very solid American answer. But most of the other answers were like, And then I had this difficulty, and then I found politics, where I bother you every single day. Okay, time for some of your questions from the mailbag. So let's jump right in, because many of you have written in, particularly if you're a subscriber to Daily Wire. If you subscribe over at Daily Wire, then it turns out that you get to send me messages via the mailbag, and there's a good shot that they get read on air. John says, hey, Ben, love the show. While there are a plethora of arguments against socialized healthcare, the cost of healthcare as it is exorbitantly high for many people, myself included. I can't get insurance through my work, and I have a $6,500 deductible with the plan I can't afford. My question is, how can the cost of healthcare be reduced without government intervention? Thanks. Well, okay, so there's really two groups of people who need health insurance. There's healthy people and people who already have a pre-existing condition. If you have a pre-existing condition, you're not actually seeking to buy health insurance. You're seeking to buy a plan that is going to pay for your condition. Because the fact is, that's not insurance, right? You don't buy fire insurance after your house is on fire. You buy it before your house is on fire. So if you're healthy, the question is, how do we get enough healthy people to sign up for health insurance to help defray the cost from people who have pre-existing conditions? And the answer to that, historically speaking, was social institutions, right? You got together with all the members of your church, you created a healthcare co-op, and then everybody got insured as a group. And that helped defray some of the costs of the insurance company. Well, those sorts of things still do exist in the private sector, and you can go look for them. I mean, they really are out there. These organizations, private organizations, where people get together and then act as a risk pool, because that's really what insurance is about, is the risk pool. As far as bringing down costs more generally, we need deregulation of the medical industry. Administration sucks up an enormous amount of cost when it comes to medicine. Dealing with various insurance companies obviously takes up a lot of time and a lot of effort. A lot of that has to do with making sure that you are compliant with various state and federal regulations. You should, of course, as President Trump has said, be able to buy insurance across state lines. It's very silly that you're not allowed to do that. You also want to get involved in incentivizing health savings accounts, right? You should make it tax-free for people to take their money and put it in a health savings account, which would encourage them to save up for a time when they are not healthy. So as I've always said, when it comes to healthcare, there are three elements that you're looking for. You're looking for quality, you're looking for affordability, you're looking for universality. The left likes to focus on universality and affordability at the expense of quality. The right likes to focus on quality and affordability at the expense of universality. And honestly, I, of course, am on the right. I would prefer quality and affordability over universality, because universality can really only be forced by the government getting involved. It does take government compulsion to ensure that every single person has some form of health care provided to them. But I think you can get nearly everybody in a private healthcare system, and frankly, that's what was true before Obamacare even. Only 7% of Americans were living without healthcare insurance before Obamacare, and we do have this vast mishmash of public and private healthcare resources in the United States. The truth is, there are large-scale subsidies for most healthcare in the United States, and there has been for years. So to presume that America is a fully private medical insurance industry is just not true. Okay, John says, there are some politicians in my state working to change our elections to a system of ranked voting. I haven't seen any discussion in the media about the pros and cons of the system compared to the status quo. What are your thoughts on it? Well, ranked voting is this idea that you can vote. It particularly works in primaries. When there are two candidates, ranked voting doesn't matter. It only works when you're talking about multiple candidates. The reason being, let's say that you vote in a primary, like a national primary, and you say, my top choice is Joe Biden, but my second choice is Elizabeth Warren. Well, the way that it works now without ranked choice voting is that, let's say you voted for Biden, and then Biden were to lose the primary, right? So he's not going to be or let's say not a primary. Let's say it's a senatorial race with multiple candidates. It has 3 candidates or 4 candidates. What you do is you vote for your top choice. Let's say that person loses. Well, what happens to your vote? Now, normally your vote is gone, right? You spent it, the person lost, it's over. But instead, with ranked choice voting, your second place vote then goes to the other person. So what you end up with is a system where multiple parties are more possible, because obviously if one person is a lot of folks' second choice, then somebody losing may amount to a third party doing a lot better. There are a lot of experts who suggest that ranked choice voting is a good idea. I am not averse to ranked choice voting, frankly. I think it would be interesting to see more candidates with a viable shot at power as opposed to the binary system that we currently have. George says, hey, Ben, I just started college and I want to be politically active. I don't want to embarrass myself, so I've started looking into my beliefs in order to make sure I truly believe them. In doing so, I've stumbled onto the realization I need to read the founding philosophies of the West. I'm in the middle of your book right now. It's great. I want to continue my journey once I'm finished. I was wondering what you would say the essential reading list is for Western thought. Thanks. Well, frankly, every major name that I talk about in the book is sort of required reading. If you want to go all the way back to the beginning, you got to start with the Bible. It is a foundational text for Western civilization. And you actually have to read some of the commentaries and try to understand what people think when they read the Bible, not sort of the simplistic Sam Harris version of you when you were 12 years old trying to read the Bible, but trying to understand the deeper meaning of the Bible. Then you have to start delving into Greek thought. So Plato and Aristotle would be the easiest places to start. You would also want to look at maybe some Stoic thought or post-Stoic thought, people like Cicero, who was obviously very useful to the founders. You'd probably want to read some ancient philosophy. You want to read some Thomistic philosophy, for example. And then you'd want to read some of the religious writings of Martin Luther, for example. You'd want to read Calvin. This is if you have time. If you don't have time, then what I would suggest is you just go and buy a set of Will Durant books and start reading through those, because he does a pretty good job of recapping history, and it saves you a little bit of time. So read my book. I do mention, I think, most of the major Western thinkers, and I give what I hope is a very user-friendly survey of the evolution of Western thought. Find the people that you find interesting and then read more deeply into them. Lauren says, Dear Ben, has Texas always been on the cusp of turning purple or blue, or is this a trend that has arisen in recent years? Thanks, Larry. Well, there have been Democratic governors of Texas before. There was one in the early part of the 1990s. But Texas has generally been red for quite a long time. It's been a long time since Texas was blue, and it was really when the Democratic Party was more moderate. This is something different. Watching Texas turn purple is a different thing than has happened in the past. Hunter says, given that the Founding Fathers never expected there to be political parties, are there inherent problems in our two-party system? How can we address them? What do you think about the original zero-party idea? Is it possible? I don't think that it is possible. There are always going to be needs for organizations that support particular candidates. People do tend to cluster around broader philosophies. That's why parties form. And the truth is that when the founders talked about the dangers of faction, they weren't specifically talking about the dangers of political party. They were talking about the idea that you were going to get together with a bunch of people who only stand for that group of people, not for broader ideas about what's good for the country. That's what they were afraid of. And we are starting to see that in the return to identity politics, tribalism on both left and right. I don't think the parties are the problem. I will say that, again, to get back to that ranked choice voting idea, the idea of changing the voting system so that you can have your second preference actually matter in a lot of elections. This is particularly true for Republicans in states like California. I think that would be an interesting idea. More diversity in party identity would be a good thing, I think. And George says, hey, Ben, I was wondering, what is your opinion regarding, as the Constitution puts it, cruel and unusual punishment? Do you think there's a place for more severe punishments for abhorrent crimes like rape or murder? Thank you, George. 100% I do. When the founders talked about cruel and unusual punishment, it is absurd to claim that banned the death penalty. That's ridiculous. The death penalty is explicitly written in the Constitution with regard to treason, for example. So that is silly nonsense. Now, does that mean that I'm in favor of, weird forms of torture? No. I am in favor of the death penalty in cases of child rape and murder, for example, and I think most people are in the United States. In a little while, we are going to recap the big Democratic debate. Oh, it was such a knockdown, drag-out, boring-ass affair. My goodness. I mean, if you made it through all 3 hours, congratulations to you. It was like a Terrence Malick film. My goodness. It was like Tree of Life played in slow motion. It was just horrifying in every way. First, we're going to take some more of your questions from the mailbag, because it is indeed a Friday. Belinda says, Dear Ben, I'm thinking about drawing up a living will. What do you believe regarding life support treatments? If in a coma or suffering from a progressive or terminal illness and recovery is unlikely, what treatments are morally acceptable? When is it morally acceptable to pull the plug? So the basic rule in Jewish philosophy is that you are generally not supposed to pull the plug, so be very careful about when you want the plug connected, is basically the idea. Meaning that if you are plugged into the machine and you are artificially alive, you are still alive. So you got to be careful about when you want to be plugged in, and you got to be very clear about, if you slip into a coma, do you actually want those measures taken? Now, on a non-Jewish level, on sort of a secular reasoning level, my basic feel is that if you're brain dead, then on a moral level, I don't see the huge problem with withdrawing the plug. I believe that brain death is death, effectively. And there is sort of a rich debate in religious philosophical circles about exactly this. But if you're talking about withdrawing feeding tubes from people who are otherwise alive, or people whose brains are functional, then I think you run into some severe moral difficulties. Of course, these are all extraordinarily difficult questions, because when people are suffering from significant pain, watching people prolong their pain is obviously a terrible, terrible thing. But having doctors kill them as opposed to withdrawing treatment, is a line that we need to be very careful with, obviously. Kyle says, hey, Ben, who is the all-time home run king in your book? For me, the only correct answer is Hank Aaron. This is the correct answer. Barry Bonds is not the all-time home run king because some of those fly balls end at the warning track if the dude isn't juicing. Also, who is your favorite pitcher of all time and favorite position player of all time? Well, favorite pitcher of all time is Koufax. I think that my father might disown me if I said anybody except for Koufax. But Koufax was indeed for 5 or 6 years the greatest pitcher in the history of baseball. The modern equivalent would be Pedro Martinez in the late 90s. In the late 90s, Pedro was just astonishingly good. And as far as favorite position player of all time, well, there was my favorite player, who was Ozzie Guillen. I enjoyed watching Ozzie. He was always, his uniform always ended dirty. I like players whose uniforms always end up dirty. If you're going to talk about just generally the best quote-unquote position player, if I had to pick one player to start a team, you'd be hard-pressed not to start with Ruth, obviously, since he was the best pitcher and the best hitter of his time. I'd put Ty Cobb up there as well, and Ted Williams is the greatest hitter who ever lived. Joshua says, hey, Ben, one thing that has been breezed over, which I want more discussion on, is the recent developments in Brexit. Could you give a synopsis of why Americans and the English more so should be worried about what's going on between Parliament and the Prime Minister and what this means for the future of the UK? Okay, to make a very long story short, basically, the Prime Minister is struggling with the Parliament right now to move forward with Brexit. Brexit was a referendum. It said, should the EU and the UK separate? And the British people voted in the most populous census in history, the most populous British election in history, to move away from the EU. And since then, the political parties have not been able to get it done because the Brexit referendum didn't say how it was to be done. The political parties were struggling to negotiate some sort of Brexit with the EU. Theresa May failed to do so. Boris Johnson took over, and Johnson said, listen, I have a mandate. My mandate is I'm doing Brexit, and this is coming hell or high water. Parliament then passed some sort of bill saying, well, without our permission, you really can't. So there's not going to be any no-deal Brexit. And Johnson has basically been trying to dissolve Parliament and then set a deadline for when Brexit will go forward anyway. So they have a quote-unquote constitutional crisis over there. The Labour Party does not want to call for new elections because their great fear is that Johnson will then win an overwhelming victory and move forward with Brexit anyway. So what they want is a guarantee from Johnson and the Conservative Party that they will not engage in a no-deal Brexit in return for a new election. And Johnson's like, well, no, I'm not making that deal. So you basically have an impasse in which Parliament claims that there can be no no-deal Brexit, and in which Johnson says, well, maybe there can be, and in which Johnson says, if you don't like it, why don't you declare a new election? And in which Parliament's like, nah, we're not going to do that. So it's a mess, obviously. Brandon says, was Beto O'Rourke as publicly anti-gun when he was running against Cruz? Good question. No, he was not. Because Beto O'Rourke pretended to be a moderate at that time, right? He was a unifying figure in Texas. Do you really think Beto O'Rourke would have won 49% of the vote, 48, 49% of the vote if he was running on, I'm confiscating every gun in Texas? He would have won 0.49% of the vote, right? Like 0.49. He would have won under 1% of the vote if he'd gone in Texas to the mat on, I'm confiscating your weaponry. Mike says, hey, Ben, love the show. Keep up the great work. Could you please explain the reasoning behind why the different polls can have such different numbers? I appreciate it and hope you have a great weekend. Well, one, it depends on sample size. So the larger the sample size, the closer the numbers are supposed to be. Two, how you derive the sample is very difficult. So some of these polls rely on landlines, which means that the crowd is a little bit older. Some of them are trying to model based on the 2016 turnout pattern. Some are trying to take into account 2018 turnout patterns. See, pollsters, it's not just the use of numbers. It's an attempt to mimic what they believe the electorate is going to look like in 2020. And it's not all that easy to figure that out because certain crowds will show up, certain crowds will not. Do you break it down by demographics? Do you break it down by age? Do you break it down by location? It's a pretty difficult business. So you sort of have to take the average of the polls, which is why the Real Clear Politics poll average is the one that I am constantly using. Speaking of which, coming up, we're going to recap the big Democratic debate last night. I know you didn't make it through it, but I did. I'll talk about it with you. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.